to this morning's presentation, I'd like to introduce to you to Tim Boggess. And yes, the name should sound familiar. He's in that same family. But Tim is going to be talking to us today, of course, about ethics in the workplace. And just to give you a little bit of background, he's also a business major, business management major. He graduated from Wake Forest. And he also continued at Wake Forest to get his law degree. So he has his law degree from Wake Forest. Upon graduating from law school, he went into private practice in Princeton, in the area. And how long were you there in private practice?
About 3 years.
3 years in the private practice, and then he went to the prosecuting attorney's office. And he's been in the prosecuting attorney's office for Mercer County for 14 years. He has been Mercer County's prosecuting attorney since 2007. So with all those credentials and so forth, let me turn it over to Mr. Tim Boggess. Thank you.
Thank you. It's good to be here. You'll have to excuse me. I've lost my voice the last couple of days, and I'm just starting to get it back, so I don't know how long it's going to last. So either I'll talk real fast, which I normally don't do, or we'll cut it short. But when they asked me to come and talk about ethics, it's kind of ironic that they had asked a lawyer to talk about ethics. One of the first things I looked up on the computer when I started looking up things about business ethics was a story about a lawyer. It's a little story about how an elderly gentleman came to a lawyer and wanted to get a will drafted. Well, the lawyer drafted the will for the elderly gentleman. When the elderly gentleman was leaving, he gave him a $100 bill to pay for the will. After the elderly gentleman left, the lawyer noticed that they were crisp $100 bills, and there had been two of them that had stuck together. So the lawyer was confronted with his first ethical dilemma. And his ethical dilemma was, should I tell my partner? Now, obviously, he wasn't going to give him the money back. It was whether or not he was going to tell his partner. So that's kind of the reputation that lawyers have, and it's kind of ironic that when we start talking about ethics that lawyers are one of the more regulated professions when it comes to ethics. I brought with me today, just for point of reference to show you, there is a code of ethics for lawyers that's 87 pages long that dictates how I'm supposed to behave and what the types of things I'm supposed to do. There's a same thing for judges, a canon of judicial conduct that's 26 pages long that's supposed to outline how judges are to behave and the things that they're supposed to do. Saying that, there's still so many situations that you're confronted with that really put yourself in an ethical dilemma. As a prosecutor, I'm confronted with many different things every day, on a daily basis. Some of the things that I routinely am confronted with from an ethical standpoint are communicating with defendants. If there is a defendant and he's represented by a lawyer, I can't talk to him at all as a prosecuting attorney. Now, how many times a week do you think defendants come up to my office wanting to talk to me without their lawyer? Every week I have people coming up there wanting to talk to me about their case. If there's something that they've got to explain that their lawyer's just not explaining to me. You know, I'll be out on the street and somebody will come up and I don't even recognize them. Will start talking to me about a case. And then when they start talking to me, I start figuring out, so wait a minute, is this your case? What is your name? And then I'll figure out, because we have 5,000 misdemeanor cases in Mercer County and about close to 400 felonies a year. So I can't remember everybody right off, but I generally will recognize a name eventually. So they'll start telling me about the case, and I'll find out, so, well, wait a minute. Do you have a lawyer? And he said, well, yeah, but my lawyer's really not doing a very good job. I just want to tell you this. So at that point, I'm in a situation where I can't talk to him, and if he keeps on talking, I'm in a situation where I have to start reading his Miranda rights. So there I am out on the street saying, well, you know, I got to tell you, you got a right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you. But that really puts me in an ethical dilemma when we start going to court, and then if I go to trial, this man on the street says, well, yeah, I stabbed the guy, but I wanted to tell you why I stabbed him. Well, when we go to court and he takes a stand and he starts saying, no, that wasn't me, it was somebody else, can I use what he told me on the street when he was giving me a statement without his lawyer present? So there's the ethical dilemma for me. What do you do? You know, there's cases out there that, you know, if they approach you, you know, it's okay, but there's so many things that you're confronted with on a daily basis that you really don't give much thought to until a situation occurs. There's also a situation with lawyers that raises many ethical dilemmas that, as a prosecuting attorney, I guess to give you a little bit of background about what I do, I'm not meaning to sound self-righteous here, but a prosecuting attorney is not like a typical lawyer. As a prosecuting attorney, we're held to a higher standard than other lawyers. We have what they call a quasi-judicial role in the court system. While most of the lawyers advocate for a particular client or the defendant, a prosecutor's an advocate, but he's not supposed to advocate for any one particular person. The prosecuting attorney advocates for all of you people in this room. We advocate for society, and the best way to say it is we advocate for justice. Now, being an advocate for justice, sometimes I have to make very difficult, hard decisions that are not always popular. Sometimes that may mean letting somebody that's been charged with a crime go if the evidence is not sufficient to establish that that person committed that crime. That's not always a popular thing to do, especially for the person that was the victim of that crime. But as an advocate for justice, we're held to a much different standard and a much different level. Defense attorneys oftentimes can get by with certain things that a prosecutor could never get by with. And it's the practical experiences that you encounter in a court case. Say, for instance, we have a murder case. Now, in law, there are what they call discovery issues. It's not like on TV where you walk into a courtroom and people are always blindsided by this evidence that you just don't know about. Because there are what they call discovery, where lawyers have to disclose to the other side, before I ever take a case to trial, the defense knows every witness that I'm going to call to the stand. They know everything that each one of those witnesses is going to testify about. And they've been able to see every piece of evidence that the state has. So they're able to prepare for that. The state also has the burden of an ongoing obligation of when new evidence is discovered, that I have to provide that to the defense. So at times it raises ethical dilemmas on whether or not what evidence is truly going to be used. If I don't use it, does that mean I don't have to disclose it? But you have to look at what is exculpatory, meaning what's likely to show that this person did or did not commit this crime. It's not just if it shows that they did not commit this crime, but if it's likely to lead to other evidence that could be exculpatory, then I have to disclose it. So if I gather a piece of evidence in my investigation that I'm not planning on using in my trial, but there's a possibility, the courts have expanded that to now that there's even a possibility that that could lead to exculpatory evidence, then do I have to disclose that to the defense, even if I'm not going to use it? So throughout the case, there's continual ethical dilemmas as whether or not this rises to that level. I always err on the side of caution. If I think there's any question, I always send it. The thing about ethics is, and I'm going to tell you up front, regardless of what anybody says, it's always better to be ethical, in my opinion. You may make more money in the short run being unethical, but it's always going to catch up to you. That's the same in my profession, in the practice of law. If you start doing things that are unethical, people are going to quit trusting you. When they quit trusting you, then that's going to be your reputation, and it's going to be much more difficult for you down the road. There are lawyers in our county that I don't trust. And I'm just going to tell you that very forthright. There's a list. When I first became a prosecutor, we had a prosecutor that hired me by the name of Charlie Smith. He was like a grandfather type figure. And he says, there's 3 people that you got to watch out for. And he told me right up front 3 people that I needed to watch. And those 3 people are still on my list of people that I don't trust. They've never proved me wrong. I wish they would someday prove to me that I was wrong about them. But your reputation will precede you. Other things that conflicts that arise within the prosecutor setting is situations where we're getting a case prepared and the defendant comes to us and says, hey, I think I want to enter a plea bargain agreement. At that time, we have discovered that the witness or the victim has disappeared. Now, do we tell the guy that wants to enter into the plea bargain agreement? he's wanting to plead guilty, but the victim has disappeared. Do we tell him that, or do we go ahead and let him enter into the plea bargain agreement thinking he wants to do it, so we'll just let him do it? Do you have a question?
Can we ask questions now?
Yeah. If you
brought up the issue of trust, I'd like to know the 3 things we need to look for to determine whether or not we can trust an attorney. What put those people on the list?
Put them on a list? I have a list in my office of people I don't trust. You know, you do it by reputation somewhat. You know, people's reputations precede them. I mean, that's always the case in every profession. That's why it's better to be ethical. You can tell by the dealings that you have with the person, whether or not they're going to be honest with you. I mean, you eventually, you can tell those types of things. You know, how, it's like anything else. You just got to learn to read people. I can't tell you exactly how you can trust them or not trust them. It's you use your own sixth sense on how you develop that trust or not trust. But I don't really know how to answer that as far as, I mean, if you want me to give you the names of the people I don't trust, I'm not going to give you the names of the people I don't trust. But it's just as in any other business. I mean, you develop that through your dealings. And it's easy to sometimes see through the dealings when they're starting to want you to do things like, well, I know that, you know, this suit's very important. This is a contract case. And let me see the contract. Well, this contract's really not favorable to you. Do you have another contract that we could use? You know, that's a bad example, but, you know, he goes, if you lose that contract, then we're going to be in a better example or a better situation, because then we can say it was just a verbal contract. You know, that's a very egregious act, but, you know, that's an example. When they start trying to get you to do things that you don't think are right, you know, that sends up a red flag. And that sometimes happens. You know, when they start telling witnesses what they need to say, even though they know that something is contrary, then that sends up a red flag. And there's certain lawyers that I know of, and not all of them are just here local, but they're across the state, have told their witnesses what to say, even though they know that something is contrary, because that's what's going to best suit their case. That happens. Anybody that thinks that everybody that goes into the courtroom always tells the truth is very naive. Even though you raise your right hand and swear to take the oath to tell the truth is not always told. But the truth will eventually come out. So, I guess to get back to where we were, you know, it raises the dilemma of whether or not we should tell the defendant that victim has disappeared. What do you all think? From an ethical standpoint, should a prosecutor tell the defendants about to enter a guilty plea that the victim has disappeared? You think you should? I usually do. Now, I tell them, I'll say, look, and this is the situation that we had not long ago. I've told them, so look, we've got a problem with our case. The victim has disappeared. Now, you wanted to enter this plea. I'll still allow you to enter this plea right now. But if you don't want to enter the plea and I find the victim, all pleas are off the table. Do you think that's ethical or unethical? Is that fair enough? That's what I do. I hope it's not unethical, because there's no constitutional guarantee to a plea bargain agreement. But if they want to take advantage of the situation where a victim has disappeared, if I find that victim, and 90% of the time we always find the victims, it's probably higher than that. They'll eventually turn up. But if we find the victim, then all plea bargains are going to be off the table, so it still gives them the opportunity to enter that same plea. Now, we also run into other ethical dilemmas about, when I talk about ongoing discovery issues, the prosecuting attorney is responsible for what police officers do, believe it or not. So if a policeman is making comments to the press about a case, who do you think is ultimately responsible? It's going to be me as the prosecutor is responsible if the police officers are making statements in the press that they're not supposed to be making. So I have to have conversations with police officers about what they can and cannot say to the media. Now, it also arises at situations that policemen are human too. And what do you think a prosecutor should do if a policeman comes to me and tells me that he's going to testify to something that I know for a fact is absolutely not true. What does a prosecutor do at that point? Do you call him to the stand and let him tell a lie? And that happens sometimes. And it's maybe not that the policeman is intentionally lying. Maybe the case is old and he's not remembered correctly. But there's many situations where that has happened. Well, not many, but there are situations where a policeman has come and said that he's going to testify to something that you know is absolutely not true. So that puts the prosecutor in a very awkward position. What would you all think you would do in that situation? Anybody? Would you tell the policeman what he needs to testify to? Would you tell him that you know that that's not true and tell him why you know it's not true and let him rethink about his testimony? Or do you just not call him to the stand because you know he's going to tell a lie? Or maybe not a lie, just not going to be truthful. Tell him what that you know it's not true and why, and let him think about his testimony. You know, that's the problem with ethics, is there's not always a clear-cut answer. So that's often a dilemma that arises, and it's not that, again, that police officers lie, but if we were sitting in this room and everybody's looking out the window and they see a car accident, everybody's going to notice different things. So sometimes it comes out that somebody may not be telling the truth, but it's everybody perceives situations differently. Sometimes we have conflicting testimony between police officers. Does that mean one of the police officers is lying? Not necessarily. But there are situations where, you know, somebody may try to testify to something that you know is absolutely not true, which puts the prosecutor in a situation that you'd have to do something such as that, or else just not call the police officer to the stand at all. In that situation, if you know it's not true and you don't call the police officer to the stand, but the defense attorney says, I am going to call him to the stand, does the prosecutor have an obligation to tell the defense attorney that he's going to testify to something that you know is not true? Again, it's just another one of those ethical dilemmas. I would probably tell the defense attorney that the policeman's not going to testify to something that I know is not true. It would be damaging to his case if he calls him to the stand. Many times defense attorneys say, well, if you don't call the policeman, I will. You know, you could always let him play into it, and you know that it's going to damage him and it's going to hurt the defense's case, but do you tell him that beforehand? I tell them. Now, if they go ahead and try to do it thinking that I'm just trying to sabotage their case and it still hurts them, you know, I guess that's on the defense counsel for having the warning of it and still doing it anyway. But I always try to tell them and be completely candid and honest about what's going on. There are situations, what they call them, there's a federal line of cases called giglio cases, where if somebody has ever been caught doing something improper, illegal, or dishonest, in federal court they always have to disclose that before they testify, and they give them what they actually call it, a giglio letter. So before they take the stand, they have to give that letter to the defense attorneys and let them know what they had done previously, to let them know if that's subject for cross-examination material that affects their credibility. So there are often situations where we have, even in our cases, if there's a policeman that's been writing worthless checks, is that something that affects his credibility when he takes the stand? Do I need to disclose that to a defense attorney that this policeman's been writing worthless checks around town? Does that affect his credibility or his honesty? Who knows? So those are the type of dilemmas that we encounter every day. Now, we also run in a situation where people will switch sides, so to speak. I'll have people that used to be defense attorneys become prosecutors, or prosecutors become defense attorneys. Now, if they were a defense attorney and had represented someone in the past, would they be barred from prosecuting them in the future? You know, usually not. But say that they represented this man years ago on a rape case, and he had a standard operating procedure, so to speak, how he would scout out his victims, he would leave a calling card of some sort, some kind of mark that was significant to him, and then he started doing that case again. Would that prosecutor be able to represent him in a similar case if he knew certain facets about this individual from where he had represented him before? You know, that raises another ethical dilemma for that prosecutor. That situation, he may not be able to represent the state and prosecute that individual if he gathered that information from his time representing him in the as a defense attorney. Now, all these seem like strange scenarios, but they are still ethical problems that you encounter on a daily basis. They're very routine, but it's always best, and I find, to do it's much easier to do what's right. And in the long run, even though it hurts you short term, it's going to help you in the long run because you're going to gain credibility. In the business world, many of you, the only thing you're going to have starting out is going to be, you're going to have to develop your reputation. Now, if you start out being ruthless and cutthroat, you're going to develop that reputation, and that's going to precede you in how you do business and the things that you do. Now, if you do things honestly and fairly, then that's also going to precede you, and people are going to know that when they're dealing with you, they're going to want to deal with you. Now, in business, my very first job, I had a couple years before I went to law school that I worked in sales. Now, sales is another situation where you oftentimes wonder about the ethics of salesmanship. Do you have to necessarily mislead somebody to be a good salesman? I sold office equipment. Man, that was a horrible job. It's hard to sell office equipment because it's very competitive. So how do you go out there every day, and do you have to lie to get somebody to buy your equipment? No. And if you do lie to somebody, you're never going to sell them another piece of equipment along the road. Now, if you work for a small corporation or a big corporation, you might think it's a little bit different. When you're working for a large corporation, the acts that you do are going to reflect on that large corporation, which the corporation ain't going to like it if you're doing unethical behavior. But when you're working for yourself or a small corporation or a closely held corporation, everything that corporate entity is known for is going to reflect back to you. So it's very important to do things fairly, honestly, and openly. For instance, in sales, the main objective in sales is to show the benefit to the person that's wanting to buy something, how this is going to help them. Now, do you have to lie about how it's going to help them? No. If you're a good salesman and you know your product, you just let them know how that's going to be beneficial to them. If you sell it to them, who are they going to come to the next time they need something if it's truly what they need? Now, if you sell them something they don't need, do you think they're going to come back to you the next time? Maybe you make a big commission the first time, but they're not going to come back to you the next time. So in business and in ethics, you always got to do what's right. And in the long run, you got to, in the long run, it will always come back to you. Again, when I was looking at this to know what to talk about, they really talked about ethics almost seems like philosophy. There's usually no clear-cut answer on what to do, and there's really no clear-cut guidelines.
I'm not meaning to interrupt you, but I do have another question, and it does deal with ethics and salesmanship. We have an unfortunate disaster in Raleigh County now, and driving through Beckley this morning, happened to hear on the radio an advertisement, a new advertisement. I'm an experienced attorney in trying damage cases for the lumber and coal mining industry, and if you or your family know of anybody that has had issues in the coal mining industry, call such and such firm. Because we have experience in these industries. Now, I'd like your opinion on that type of advertising and the ethics of that.
I wouldn't do it, not at this juncture. But, you know, it's up to the individual, too, on how they do it. You know, in the long run, how's that going to affect them in the short run? Maybe they get some big cases. I think it's inconsiderate myself, but it's everything that we have. You know, when we have storms, when we had hurricanes, what's the first thing before the the oil's already in the ground that you're buying at Kroger. If you go to Kroger for your gas, the oil's already in the tanks. There's a hurricane coming through the Gulf. What do the gas prices start doing? Has the price in the tank changed? What they paid for the gas that's already in the ground, has it changed? But what's the prices doing at the outside? They're already going up. Now, when the hurricane misses and doesn't do any damage to the oil rigs, does the gas at the gas station automatically start coming down as quickly as it went up? Not until the guy across the street starts lowering his prices a little bit will this guy start lowering his prices. Then it starts getting to a battle until they get down to what's their reasonable profit margin. Now, is that ethical? I don't think it is. And in fact, I had several complaints we were working with the Attorney General on price gouging when Hurricane Katrina went through. Because before the hurricane even hit, prices were starting to go through the roof. And you started hearing about people running out of gas in Charlotte, North Carolina. There was no gas in Charlotte, so prices up here go through the roof. So there were actually elements that people were starting to look into on whether or not that was price gouging. Obviously, it's unethical, but oftentimes what's unethical is also illegal. And there it's a little clearer cut on what you do when it violates the law and when it violates ethics. Now, everything that's unethical is not necessarily illegal, and everything that's illegal is not necessarily unethical. But sometimes the two do meet. As I was saying a moment ago, that there is the philosophical versions of ethics. And when I was looking it up, they said, for corporations, a corporation can neither be ethical nor unethical. Do you all believe that? Can a corporation be ethical, or can a corporation be unethical? I think that they can, and how they do business. There's certain scholars out there that say a corporation can be neither ethical nor unethical. A corporation is not a being, so they can be neither. They said that the corporation's primary objective is to make a profit. They said if they start considering anything other than what's in the best interest of their stockholders, is the corporation then being unethical because it's violating its truest goal of being profitable? So when it starts considering other things, does that make it unethical? I don't think it does, but these are the scholars talking. I'm not as smart as those guys, because I think ethics would apply to everybody on a corporate level and a personal level. Corporations that do things unethically are eventually going to pay. Those corporations that take their workers overseas and use child labor, do you think that's ever going to come back to that corporation? When people find out about that, do they quit buying as much of their product? Or if they are fair in how they do their labor wages and use the labor as they're supposed to, are people more likely to continue buying that product? We had the situation with, I guess it was at Nike at one point, that they said they were using child labor overseas, and there was the big hoopla over them. People starting to talk about they're going to boycott the tennis shoe maker, and then they say, oh no, we're not using child labor, and they brought jobs back overseas. So, and is sending jobs overseas unethical if you're an American company? Is it unethical to send jobs overseas if you can get them done for lower wages? Is that unethical, or is that good business? I don't know that answer. But there's always situations that's going to arise that puts you in an ethical dilemma. Is it unethical for us to use the natural resources that we have here now, not thinking of what's going to happen in the future? Is it unethical to use as much oil as we use every day and not preserve any for the future? Should we ration out so that our future generations have something? Is that an ethical dilemma? Who knows? I don't know that that's necessarily ethics, but is that something to consider as far as an ethical situation? Now, as far as ethics go, there were some different scenarios that we'll talk about, because I don't think I can keep talking much longer. My voice is going to go. But to get you all involved, to see what you all tell me what the ethical dilemma is, and if there is an ethical dilemma, maybe what you all would do. There's just a few scenarios that we can go over, or a couple, and then I'll open it up for any other questions about anything I do in the prosecutor's office or anything that y'all want to talk about. I'll be more than happy to answer. Just a couple of ethical situations. One, I want to talk about whether or not the ends justify the means. Say there's a big pharmaceutical company. Now, in American law, American corporations are held to the fact that they cannot pay bribes of any kind. Now, overseas, it's much different. Certain countries, it's expected that a bribe will be paid before you can do certain types of business. Now, that raises the situation when you start talking about international ethics, which ethical standards do you adhere to? Because every culture is going to have a different ethical standard. Do you adhere to the American standards, or do you adhere to the standards of the country that you're going to do business? Certain countries, like I said, the bribes are expected. Say you're a pharmaceutical company, and somebody's come to you, a nonprofit organization has come to you, and they want you to make like safety kits that has much of your medication that's needed in, say, war-torn Bosnia or someplace like that. And it's your company's not making much profit, but you're still going to be making some money, or you wouldn't do it. When you start investigating, you find out that there was some money paid to an official in a foreign country. So you approach the guy and say, hey, what is this? Is this a bribe? And the guy from that got the money together says, this really wasn't a bribe, but here's what happens. We've got to get this medicine into Bosnia. We have 1 million of these kits that we've got to get into there. Each of these kits, we have so many that we can put in each truck. Each truck has to go through so-and-such country. We have to put all the kits in the back with cash in the glove box. So in case they get stopped by the military, they can pay the military what they need to keep the kits going on through. If they don't have the money, then what's happened in the past is the kits get taken, the people driving the vehicles have been stopped, shot, executed. So at that point, is it okay to pay a bribe then? Do the ends justify the means? If you've got to get medicine into that country, is it okay to pay a bribe then? I mean, it violates U.S. law, but again, if the medicine's got to get there, is that okay? What do y'all think? Do the ends justify the means? Or do you just not send medicine to that country? Anybody?
I think it does. If it's your employees that you're sending over there, and that's a potential risk for them to get harmed if they're not paying the bribes, that's on, that blood is on your hands if you don't do it. If they go over there and they get harmed because you didn't want to pay the bribes because you were following American policy. I mean, for one, you probably won't be able to live with yourself. For two, it's just that's unethical in itself.
What if it's not your employees but just delivery company? Does that make it different?
I mean, well, still, they're sort of kind of subcontracted out with you, so like you still have a sort of responsibility. But
They're still delivering it for you.
yeah.
And if you know that's going to happen. How about if you're an airline pilot and you're flying across the country and somebody on your flight starts having a heart attack? Now the problem is when you're trying to land the plane, you call for clearance at the nearest airport, and the airport says, we can't do it right now because we're in the middle of a snowstorm. Well, you as the pilot think that you can still land in that snowstorm, but you're risking the lives of all the other passengers. But you know if you don't land now, that the person that's having the heart attack is definitely going to die. So what do you do in that situation? Do you risk all the lives of the passengers and crew? Or do you sacrifice the life of the one that's having a heart attack? What do you do in that situation? These are tough questions, aren't they? But how old is he? He's 38 and has 3 kids. So, so not every ethical dilemma that you have in business is going to be so difficult. It might just be in how you treat your customer and whether or not you can, maybe you get somebody that comes in and says, hey, I got $2,500 and I want to buy this fax machine. And you say, well, that fax machine's only $1,200, but you say, if you want $2,500, you can have that fax machine for $2,500. Is that ethical? If somebody says, I got $2,500 and I want to buy that fax machine, do you take the $2,500 and sell it to them even though it only costs $1,200? What do you do?
Sell them too.
Sell them too? That's a good idea. I mean, you make a good commission. But do you think if that person finds out that that fax machine was only $1,200 and they gave you $2,500, you think they'll ever come back to you for any other business? So there's a lot of ethical situations that you're going to be confronted with. But always try to do what's right. Because in the end, when you put your head on the pillow at night, you can always sleep better if you did what's right. That's why I like being a prosecutor. When I was in private practice, it seemed like lawyers had a racket of making money. And I don't make good money being a prosecutor, and I've foregone all those riches that I was going to make when I first came to college like you guys. I was going to be one of those rich lawyers. But I've foregone all those things because I know at night when I put my head on the pillow, it's always better to know that I've done the right thing. You don't make decisions for political gain or advantage. You do what's right, and it's always much easier. So I'll open it up to questions that you all have. I don't know if I've hit on anything that y'all want to talk about as far as ethics go. Ethics is such a broad range. There's so many things that you can talk about in ethics. You could probably have a symposium where you could go for, well, there's classes that's taught on business ethics that go a semester. So I've hit on very few things here, just some of the things that I encounter in my profession. You all have questions that you want to ask me about anything involving ethics or anything else?
What's your comment on the increase in white-collar crime and why you think that there's been an increase recently?
Well, a lot of the problems with white-collar crime, I think, is the nature of the economic situation that the country's in. A lot of that stuff, like with you talking Madoff type white-collar crime, it's ethics. It boils down to ethics. All that stuff was very unethical. When they're starting to talk about fixing the books, when did you think accounting could go from being a precise numbers-only thing? How do numbers lie? The accounting you start getting accounting ethics on what's reasonable in accounting. You start talking about the WorldComs and Enrons. How'd you ever think that accounting could become unethical? But certainly it does. And I think it boils down to ethics. And that people were losing sight of what was truly important. They started chasing the dollar instead of chasing what was right. I think that's how you boil it down in a nutshell, is when you chase the dollar, eventually it's always going to catch up to you. But when you do what's right, you're going to keep going on and on and on and on and on. You got the GEs, which do things a little bit more right. Do they do everything perfect? Probably not. But then you got the WorldComs and the Enrons who are chasing the dollar. You got Madoff, who was clearly doing nothing but chasing the dollar. And it was ethical violations, which ended up also being legal violation. But I think it was the economic times that we were in and the chasing of the dollar that caused many of those problems, as opposed to
Something that's always happened and just recently has been cracked down on, or is it something that really has increased in recent times?
I don't know that it's always gone on. I can't really say, but I think I think when you look at it, I think it was the times that we were in. When do you remember? What is the NASDAQ now? It's around trading at 1,500, 1,700, still under 2,000. and it was up close to 10,000 or something at one point, 7,500. So how could anything really sustain what people were really doing? People were chasing the dollar themselves in the stock market. And, eventually that's going to bust. That bubble's going to burst just as it did in the real estate market. So several of those things, it all comes down to chasing the dollar and inflated figures. And I think a lot of it was the unethical behavior. A lot of it was the unethical behavior of the mortgage brokers. They were chasing people to get them put into higher homes because they were giving them these great deals on these mortgages. But then when the time came around for those mortgages to recycle to where their adjustable rates adjusted, people couldn't afford their homes. And then you have the foreclosures just bang, 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 one after the other. Is that ethical to put people in homes they're not going to be able to afford? They can afford them the first 5 years of that adjustable rate mortgage. But when that rate adjusts, that there's no way that they're going to be able to afford them with that type of income. Is that ethical?
No, should something like that be made illegal?
I think that's what they're working on right now on the laws that they're passing now, and they revamped a lot of the stuff. The government is basically taking over everything right now, which I'm not a big fan of. But they're looking at a lot of that now and how they're going to handle those situations. So.
Do you think that's a problem from private companies when they're doing this? You just mentioned that you weren't too comfortable with the government running things. Do you think that they will be able to do it more ethically than, say, someone who is just interested in profit?
See, that's a whole other class, ethics in government. No, I don't think so. But I think personally, now you're getting into my personal views, and y'all may not think they're worth anything. But personally, I think that you've got to let everything run its course. If a company has done things that they're running themselves in the ground, you've got to let them run themselves into the ground and let somebody else come forward and take their place. How can you reward them for doing stuff wrong or improperly, and why does everybody else have to pay for it? The CEOs are getting these big salaries to do a poor job. Did the CEO at GM, do you think he got a bonus a couple years ago when he was losing like $8 billion? Yeah, he got a bonus. If a guy's playing baseball, I see you're wearing a Yankees hat. If he goes out and pitches and has a 12.49 ERA and they just sign him to a multi-year deal of $12 million a year, do you think he's going to be on the roster the next year still getting that $12 million? He's going to get cut or traded. He's not going to be in baseball if he's got a 12.49 ERA. But this GM CEO is still getting bonuses. Now, how does that happen? And why is it our obligation to cover for the GM guy? Now, I'm getting too far off topic, but I don't know that it's necessarily our obligation. Now, the flip side of that is another ethical dilemma. If GM goes under, how many people are going to lose jobs? Then who's going to pay for these people that are on unemployment? So again, the government's trying to balance those factors. And I guess the government's saying, well, look, if GM, who employs, I don't know how many people they have, 70,000 employees or something like that? 60,000, I don't know what it is. But if they lose those employees, if GM completely goes under, and all those people are without jobs, who's going to pay for that? Again, it falls back to us. So one way or the other, we're going to pay for it. So maybe the government did the right thing. I just don't like people doing a poor job and being rewarded for it. So, but how that happens, and, maybe they said, look, we don't like it either, but we'd rather keep 70,000 people working. So that's the ethics of it, maybe. Anything else?
I have one more issue that I'd like to hear your opinion on.
Okay. I got plenty of opinions.
In this state, if we have trouble with an attorney, we go to a commission and we file a complaint. And from my understanding, that commission is made up entirely of attorneys, legislated such by by a legislature that's made predominantly of attorneys. And that particular commission has a record in the United States of being the slowest and the least in terms of bringing findings against attorneys for unethical, fraudulent acts. It seems like we have a system in West Virginia that's not working. And I would specifically ask you to comment on the conflict of interest that's implied in my question.
Well, I don't know that it's necessarily a conflict of interest. Who's going to know better how lawyers are supposed to behave other than lawyers? Now, not everybody that's on the Ethics Commission necessarily has a law degree, but people that work in the Ethics Commission office, you have lawyers and non-lawyers. It's the same with engineers. How am I as a lawyer going to know what an engineer is supposed to be doing to keep his professional certifications? I think it takes someone within your own field to truly be able to gauge what you're supposed to be doing and not supposed to be doing. So I think that's why you have lawyers. Now the legislation, you know, there's not as many lawyers in our local legislature, state legislatures, what you probably think. That is the legislation that's been created, but I think that you have to have those lawyers in there to know exactly how to gauge it. Now, every time I pick up my lawyer magazine, there's somebody getting sanctioned or losing their license or doing something that it's happening. I just don't know that you don't see it, or if you don't know who these people are. So a lot of times it doesn't make the papers. But every magazine I get, there's somebody that's either got their license suspended, has lost their license, has it's happening continually. So there is oversight. People are getting sanctioned, they get reprimanded. Sometimes they get reprimanded, but it's not an official suspension of the license. So there's many things that go on that I don't know that people always know about. So I think it is working pretty good. Is it a perfect system? It's like anything else. No, it's not perfect. How do you make it perfect? If I knew the answer, I'd have them do it and make them perfect. But I don't know if that answered your question, but I think you have to have the lawyers overseeing the other lawyers because they know what standards they're supposed to be adhering to and what they're supposed to be living up to. So is it a perfect system? No. Is it the best system we got so far? Yes. Anything else? Yes.
If you have two people who are committing similar crimes, but their situations are different, who ultimately gets to decide their plea bargain or their punishment, like the differences in those punishments? If two people were to commit murder, but one person did it for insurance money and one person did it for, say, their husband was cheating, how do you decide the punishments for those?
That's hard, isn't it? Usually, the ultimate decision on how a case gets pled is up to me. Now, how they ultimately get sentenced is up to the judge, unless, as part of my plea bargain agreement, we have what they call an 11E1C finding that dictates what sentence the judge has to do. Then if the judge accepts the plea, then he has to sentence them the way we've agreed to it. Otherwise, the judge has some discretion on whether or not he gives them 40 years or 10 years or 15 years or however many years he made for a second-degree murder conviction. But how the pleas are generally set out is up to me. Now, when I make those considerations, I talk to the victims' families, and I get the victims' family input. On cases where it's like a burglary or a grand larceny or the lesser crimes, I'll still notify the families or the victims, but I'll let them know what I'm doing. When somebody has been shot, stabbed, killed, murdered, cut up, whatever, I give them much more say in how we do the plea bargain process. But when we do that, it's ultimately up to me. In fact, I just had a case not long ago that I had. It was a drug case. Somebody got killed during the course of that, and he was brutally murdered. I mean, I went to the murder scene. There was stuff everywhere. His head was almost cut off. And the family didn't want me to plea that case at all. But I know as a drug case, it's going to be hard to get a better verdict than what he was going to plead to. He's still going to plead to first-degree murder. So the family wasn't real happy with me at first, but I pled it because I thought that was the best thing to do. And when I took the job, I swore to uphold and protect and do what I thought was best. And sometimes you just got to make those tough decisions. So it's ultimately up to me. It's a big responsibility at times, but it's something that we work with.
You don't seek out the advice of everybody else, it's just all you.
Well, I have other people. I have 6 lawyers that work in my office. So we consult with one another. We consult with the families. And we sit down together. I had a meeting with that one family. We met for 2 or 3 hours. Ultimately, they were okay with it after I explained everything, that the problems that we would have, what could happen, what would be the benefits, what would be the downside. Ultimately, they were okay with what we did, but at first they were very upset with me for even thinking about pleading the case. So, yeah, we take input from a lot of people, but also I've done this for 14 years. And I've tried so many cases, I can't even count how many cases I've tried in front of a jury. And when you've tried so many cases in front of a jury, you kind of get a pretty good feel on what types of things a jury's going to do. And when you know what a jury's going to do, it helps you in laying out plea bargain agreements. We used to have one judge that was notorious for rejecting pleas, because if he didn't like it, he wasn't going to accept a plea. Now, I can think of 3 cases that he rejected the pleas on me that were big cases. Now, he'd do it on some cases, and I didn't care. But 3 cases that were big cases that I know that he rejected my plea on. Each one of those cases, when we went to trial, the jury came back with a verdict of what I offered in the plea bargain agreement. So, I mean, you kind of get a good feel of what's going to happen in the case. And that's what you got to explain to the family and the other ones. So it's not just I'm sitting in a room and I think, oh, this one should be this, or this one should be that. No, there's much consultation with the victims, the policemen, the people investigating the cases, the other lawyers, the defense attorneys. There's a lot of people that you consult with. So it's not me just sitting in a room by myself saying, this case will have this case will have that. So there's much consultation with several people throughout the process. Does that answer it? Yes, sir.
So if you could change one thing to the system, what would you change?
If I could change one thing, I'd just make it to where people wouldn't commit crimes. I'd gladly go find another job. I don't know. I honestly think that we have the greatest system in the world. Again, it's the same thing that I told him a minute ago. It's not perfect, but I still think we have the best system in the world. If I could change one thing, I don't know what I would change. I have to think about that one a little bit. I've never thought about changing one thing if I could change something. I honestly couldn't tell you. I don't know that I would change anything at this point. I would like people to be honest. You know, it would make my job much easier, but, you know, that's not necessarily changing the system.
Is it possible to teach students to be honest and ethical in a class?
I think it comes from both. You know, because not everything that they learn at home is going to do them good in the world. Not everything certain things that they learn at school is going to do them good. So I think it comes from both. Because, you know, really the question becomes, when do business ethics really begin? You know, business ethics begins right now. I mean, when y'all are here getting ready to go out into the business world, that's where the business ethics begin. If you're cheating on tests and getting grades that you really don't deserve, but then you put on your resume that you had a 3.85 GPA, is that unethical if you've been cheating through school? When you put on your resume that you've got a certain degree that you really didn't obtain, but it looks much better if you say something versus a liberal arts degree, but you change it to a business management and finance degree, you know, that sounds better than a liberal arts art history degree. But you say that you got a, you know, people do that. You say that, oh, well, people don't do that. Believe me, people do that. I used to work at a corporate recruiting firm. We used to have to try to verify what was on their resumes when they would come to us. People lie, even on their resumes. Is that unethical? Yeah, it's unethical, but people do it. So that's where it really starts now as far as coming out and really doing the right thing. It starts here. You know, when you do your resumes, be honest. Is it ethical to leave off a job that you got fired from, but there's a small enough gap in your resume that they really couldn't tell that you got fired from the job, so you just leave that job off your resume? Is that ethical? I mean, that's what you'll have to determine someday. So it's things like that. I mean, it really starts before you maybe even get employed. So many things to think about. There's no clear-cut answers on these ethics, but I think ethics starts at home and it starts in school. And I think it can, I don't know that it can be taught. I don't know if you can make somebody ethical, but you can at least make them aware of the ethical situations, which maybe raises their awareness of the ethics. So hopefully that will continue. And I think I had an ethics class back in the late 80s when I was at Wake Forest. We had an ethics class. So it was one of the earlier ethics classes back then. And, of course, you take it in law school. But any other questions? I know people are starting to get up and have to leave. Any other questions anybody has?
Thank you very much.
Thank you.